On your Toxic Positivity Friday edition of Locked On Raptors, I'll tell you why the 2026 Toronto Raptors can 100% be a playoff team.
You are Locked On Raptors, your daily Toronto Raptors podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's going on? And welcome to another episode of Locked On Raptors, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It is Friday, February the 14th. Happy Valentine's Day to all of you, my Valentines. I'm your host, Sean Woodley. I've been covering the Toronto Raptors now for 11 seasons on various platforms. You can find all my work over on Blue Sky. The show is on Instagram as well. You can also join us in the Locked On Raptors Discord server, link in the description of the podcast. Great place. Come hang out, talk ball among pals, and a great way to waste away your days. If you don't want to work on a Friday, come talk in the Discord. Just ask a simple yes or no question, and you'll inspire hours and hours of very fun conversation and debate and all that good stuff. So please join us there. Free to do as always. Of course, you can also, for free, get the Locked On Raptors newsletter into your inbox 5 days a week for the low, low price of On the House. It's me writing original about the team 5 days a week. You get Katie Heindel, national stories. She's at All-Star this weekend. I'm sure she'll have some great stuff on that next week for the newsletter. Of course, you can also go and read Michael Shearer's Thursday basketball poetries. Michael's going to be on the podcast next week to talk about his bullishness on the Brandon Ingram fit. Speaking of things we're going to talk about later on today. So please go and support the newsletter. It's you can go to the QR code on the screen, or you can go to the link in the description of the podcast to go and subscribe. All you got to do is drop your email. It costs $0. Thanks in advance. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. And with that, we are off and running here on your Toxic Positivity Friday edition of the show. For those maybe joining the show post Brandon Ingram trade, haven't checked it out in a while, whatever it might be, a reminder, Toxic Positivity Friday is a day where we put up the blinders to all the bad, all the things that have gone wrong or could go wrong with your Toronto Raptors, and only talk about the good stuff, because why not, in this season of being 17-38, have some fun with it. That's what we're here to do after all, isn't it? And on today's show, I'm going to lay out the case for why next year's Toronto Raptors can be a playoff team. And I actually don't even think it's that toxically positive. I just kind of think it's a very likely outcome that the Raptors, if some things break right, can be a playoff team next year in an Eastern Conference that seems to be in all kinds of flux. Has, yes, some very good teams at the top. I'd say 3 really good teams I would definitely bank on being there. Maybe 4 if you want to lump the Pacers in with the Knicks, the Cavs, and the Celtics. But beyond that, it's wide open, man. And the Raptors, we're going to get into it. We'll talk about the roster build and what this summer could hold and what would that, sort of mean for what the team looks like next year, the RJ Barrett of it all. We'll get into what their case will be next season up against a not very good Eastern Conference, loaded with a bunch of good players to actually have kind of a chance at being a wins machine in the regular season. We'll also get into the potential playoff viability of what that team can be. But let's get into just what's the roster going to look like? Because that obviously is the first big question here. And you need to game it out a little bit, right? We know what the roster looks like right now. It might not be the same come the new year. It also might be very similar with one very high draft pick added to the mix, in which case things get pretty interesting pretty quickly here. So yeah, let's just kind of, for argument's sake, game it out a little bit. Let's just say, the draft obviously is the first inflection point here in the offseason. What happens at the draft could inform a lot. In particular, the RJ Barrett question. If the Raptors go and draft another 2 guard, which they very well could, VJ Edgecombe is there. Ace Bailey, maybe you could classify as just like a gigantic 2 guard or someone that makes Brandon Ingram more your 2 guard. Either way, Dylan Harper, another guy. There are ways in which RJ Barrett's fit on this team becomes less obvious than other outcomes here. But for argument's sake, let's just say the Raptors get the 5th pick. They are currently in the 5th. Odds are they won't stay there. They're probably going to move up or down one way or the other. But let's just, for the sake of argument, say they get the 5th overall pick. And for me right now, the number 5 guy for me on my personal board is Kaman Malawash, the 7'2", 18-year-old center playing with Cooper Flagg at Duke. He's not putting up like gaudy nightly stat lines. He's at like 8.6 rebounds, a block, that type of stuff. But this dude is gigantic. He moves very well for someone so gigantic. He's got a 73% true shooting on the season playing for Duke. He finishes everything around the rim. He's a lob threat. Again, just He's gigantic. He is huge. And I'm kind of in on Kaman Malawash as like the guy I've kind of thrown around as like a comp. And look, I don't love comps, but it's easy to kind of process these guys that we've never really seen before by throwing out comps. Tyson Chandler really comes to mind for me. Just like enormous backstop of very good defenses. He won a Defensive Player of the Year. That's crazy. You ever think about that? Tyson Chandler winning a DPOY? Well, he did that. Crazy stuff. Either way, I think Kaman Malawash kind of has a similar profile as a player. And I think there's maybe some shooting touch you could tap into there. He's only like 2 of 9 from 3 this season. He's not really doing it, but he's 73% at the line. Let's just say they get Kaman Malawash. He becomes your long-term succession plan for Jakob Poeltl. And in the meantime, he's a very large dude to roll out as your backup center, maybe a third stringer if you're throwing in Jonathan Mobo as a small ball big at times in place of Malawash. But either way, I'm in on Kaman Malawash as the 5th pick. So let's just say they get him. If that happens, your roster takes shape looking something like this. Emmanuel Quickley, Jamal Shed, RJ Barrett, Grady Dick, Jacoby Walter. That's like your guard rotation. Then you got Brandon Ingram, Ochai Agbaji on the wings. You've got Scotty Barnes, Jonathan Mobo, Jamison Battle as your 4s, your nominal 4s, let's say. Jakob Poeltl, Kaman Malawash. And then I guess for argument's sake, again, let's say they bring back Chris Boucher on a minimum to be the 13th man. Let's say they get someone with the Blazers pick and sign him to a new deal like they did with Mobo and Shed, like a 3-year minimum deal, something like that. And then maybe you bring back Garrett Temple on a minimum again. Why not? Bring him back. Bring back the old sage man. If it's not Temple, bring in Kyle Lowry. I don't care. Let's assume they have one old head at the back of the bench on a minimum contract. That's your 15. You'll have your 3 two-way spots, one of which will be surely occupied by Elrich Shamshay. We'll see what happens with AJ Lawson, see what happens with those other two-way spots going forward. But I think that's probably the team. And that's a good, deep team. And obviously it bakes in the expectation of some year-over-year development for guys like Jonathan Mobo and Jacoby Walter and Grady Dick and Jamal Shed, Jamison Battle even. Like you need to have those guys take steps forward for this whole thing to work. But we're not so far removed from the Raptors building a really excellent second unit out of a whole bunch of kind of low drafted second round and low first round picks back in the 2017-18 season where the bench mob was the greatest thing since sliced bread. Again, not holding them to that standard because that lineup was incredible and the Raptors ruled as a result of having just so many damn good players. But if even 3 of those guys take little steps forward and sort of incrementally improve, you're looking at a team that has a pretty high price starting 5. That's good. We'll talk about the fit. I think the fit is reasonable enough, and I'm not concerned really about the RJ part of it. I do think RJ, Ingram, Scotty can work because RJ is just not a guy who needs the ball in his hands a ton. Yes, he's run more pick and roll this year. He's also someone who was like extremely low on the charts of touch time for the team last season when he was at his most successful. He's become a pretty dependable 37% catch and shoot 3-point guy who's willing to take them. He's a guy who can roar off of screens and finish, moving towards the basket as a finisher, as a cutter. In transition, he's awesome. Like RJ can get his and not mess with the fit of this team too much. And the system they play is kind of designed for if anyone's just like game to play the style they want to play, it's really there for anyone to fit into if they're able to kind of make the quick decisions and do all the stuff that Darko Ball requires. And I think all these guys are going to have. There's a lot of passing talent across the board with the starting 5. There's a lot of, basketball IQ specifically on offense in particular. Like I believe in the fit of the starting 5 with RJ Barrett. Obviously, there's a chance they move RJ, which changes the roster construction. But for the sake of this argument, let's just assume the Raptors pay the tax, which again, I think is the thing they should probably just do. I get oh God, they got to trade RJ now. They're going to be too expensive thing. They're only too expensive if they choose to not pay the tax. As it stands right now, thank you to the god Blake Murphy, who kind of gamed this out in his piece over at Sportsnet. I will link that piece in the description of the podcast as well. But Blake kind of laid it out now with the Brandon Ingram contract, presumably starting at about $38.1 million bucks next year. You'll have, and assuming they get the 5th pick, which is about $9 million bucks on the rookie scale, it goes up to about 13.8, I believe, if they get the 1st overall pick and descending from there. It's going to be very tight. There's not going to be a ton of wiggle room, and they are likely going to have to be a tax team if they want to keep RJ Barrett. There's a way in which they move RJ for like a couple cheaper bench pieces and rebalance the roster a little bit, take away their overall sort of higher end talent. And it's, still a team that makes a lot of sense and fits well. Maybe, you're missing that scoring punch from RJ a little bit. That's the alternative path here. I just think let's see what they've got first. Go with the most talented version of the team you can go with into next season with. And then if by the deadline it's not working out, you can always get out of the tax by moving RJ then. Give it some runway first, though, and then make your decisions from there. It would be kind of a shame if we barely see the team play it all down the stretch this season, and then they move RJ Barrett for financial concerns, even though you can always do that at a later date. Again, that's just kind of how I would want to see it. Either way, if that's the team, if RJ Barrett's back and they go forward with quickly, RJ, Ingram, Barnes, Pirtle is their starting five, Shed, Dick, Abaji, Mobo, Malawash, maybe some Chris Boucher minutes. Jacoby Walter, obviously very much in there. The Blazers pick, we'll see where they fit in. Jamison Battle. Like, that's a team with a lot of interesting dudes who can help you weather a long regular season. Can they win games in that regular season? That's an open question, a fair question. We'll get into why I think they actually can coming up in just 1 second. Today's show is brought to you by our good friends over at DoorDash. NBA fans, get ready. They swoosh, you save. Thanks to Dash Pass, every time a player drops 50 or more points in a game, you score a huge deal the next day. This happened this week with Jamal Murray dropping 55. Wow, it happens all the time. We live in the high-paced modern NBA. 50-point games are happening routinely. It's simple. When a player scores 50 or more in a game during the 2024-25 NBA regular season, Dash Pass members get 50% off an order, up to 10% off the next day from noon to midnight. That is pretty darn sweet. Sign up for Dash Pass and be ready to save. When any player scores 50 or more in a game, Dash Pass members get 50% off an order the next day, up to $10 off. Just use promo code NBA50 from noon to midnight after a 50-point game on eligible orders at participating merchants. Must have an active Dash Pass account. Terms apply. Visit DoorDash to learn more. And please tip your drivers well. All right, back at it here on your Toxic Positivity Friday edition of Locked On Raptors, gaming out what it would look like for the Raptors to be a playoff team next season and why I think it's very much on the table. First of all, having a lot of good rotation players is kind of a good recipe in the regular season. If you just have no stinkers out there, you're going to be able to field viable lineups for long stretches of games, take advantage of teams that are not maybe as set up to weather the 82-game stretch because they're not quite as deep. They, don't have as good players playing in those second and fourth quarter minutes where you've got bench-heavy lineups typically taking things up. Like the Raptors, they're not going to be stocked with like super-duper high-end, top-end talent next year, barring them getting Cooper Flagg in the draft or Dylan Harper. And even then, like, if they were to get those guys, first of all, it changes the math of the RJ thing, like I talked about. It also probably changes the longer term like ceiling for the team down the line. But that's not really what we're talking about for next season. It's probably similar in terms of you bringing in a rookie. You can't expect rookies to really drive winning. Cooper Flagg may be the exception because that dude is amazing. And he's just completely dominating college despite being still, I think, 17 years old or just turned 18. He's a maniac. Either way, when it comes to next year, again, just having a lot of viable rotation players is a way to win games in the NBA. It just is. It's not going to be a title contender. It's not going to be even a fringe title contender. They're not going to be some team that people are looking at going, can they win the East? I don't think that's going to be a conversation we have about the Raptors next season. There's no way. Like, again, down the line, if they get themselves a Harper or a Flagg or an Ace Bailey who really pops, then sure. Then we can have those conversations 3-4 years from now, probably. But for next year, I don't think no matter where they draft, who they add in whatever slot they pick in the summer, like they're not going to be a contender next season. But that doesn't mean that they can't be pretty good. The thing that you need to be pretty good is you got to be close to elite at something. You got to be top 10 at something. You got to have your thing, right? Remember those commercials from like the late 90s in Canada, like the "What's Your Thing" commercials with the kid doing the T-Rex sound effect. Throwback blast from the past there. Like, what's your thing if you're the Raptors, right? Will it be offense? It could be. It's just like a lot of collective offensive talent if you put quickly RJ, Scotty, Ingram, and Pirtle together. Again, the fit concerns, that's the prerequisite for all of this working. For them being a playoff team, the fit has to work. They have to find a way to massage it. Again, I talked yesterday on the show and in the newsletter about the reasons for optimism that it can happen. It seems like Brandon Ingram is very open to adaptation. You can say all the right things in the first press conference, and most people do. How it all translates once they actually start playing the games, very different story. And so I'm going to just hold off judgment on any of it until we actually see it. It could work, it could not. There are reasons to think both ways. But let's take the optimist route because it is Toxic Positivity Friday. And let's say the fit does work. Let's say the offense is humming and you have Scotty Barnes not so burdened by being this top-of-the-art creator anymore. He gets to, work closer to the rim, play finish a little bit more often, get into spots where he can go and bludgeon teams with his immense athleticism and size and physicality. You've got Brandon Ingram knocking down, a few threes a game. Maybe he's taking 6 or 7 or 8 threes a game for you. What a world that would be. You've got RJ Barrett barreling to the rim, flying around screens, doing his thing in transition, doing what RJ Barrett's done. Emmanuel Quickly guiding the offense, getting them into their stuff, flying around away from the ball with his little jitterbug action, knocking and catching shoots. Jakob Poeltl finishing around the rim. Like, there's a world in which this really makes sense, even if the spacing's like a little bit janky. With Scotty and Poeltl, it's always going to be a bit of a thing you have to overcome. But again, they find ways to create space even within low space environments, just because, they're smart players and they're able to, create little pockets, even though the team is not traditionally like a 4-out or 5-out basketball team. If it works, I think the offense has a chance to be pretty good. I do think they probably have higher upside on defense, though. I think Scotty Barnes alone, we've seen, in his minutes this season, the Raptors continue to be a very good defensive team. They would be equivalent to the 9th best defense in the NBA over the course of Scotty Barnes' minutes if you translate it into a full season. 111.6 defensive rating with Scotty on the floor. He's been amazing, and there's just been it's just sustained. This, I just think, is what Scotty Barnes is as a defensive player. He is a two-way difference maker who, he's not going to be your best offensive player, but you can build a defense around that guy, and he can be the single most impactful player on a good team. That's the formula for him. And I think Brandon Ingram, if it all works, allows that version of Scotty Barnes to be unlocked, where he's this defensive destructor who also is able to chip in and give you like easy points on the offensive end while being a facilitator, connector, a playmaker. That gets really exciting to me. And that's the kind of guy who can have enough impact to drive a winning season for a team, especially once you factor in Jonathan Mobo off the bench. The enormity that will be Kaman Malawash in this situation. Won't be a good defender as a rookie, probably, because no rookie bigs really are, unless you're Derek Lively, apparently. But if you're 7'2" and enormous, like Donovan Clingan's been good this year, there are cases of bigs coming in and being all right, just because of sheer size in recent years. Malawash as a backup center playing 15 minutes a game, 12 to 15, whatever it is, like that can be a very effective player for you. Jonathan Mobo, I mentioned him, just like an absolute defensive stud. I think he's going to be awesome and really raises the quotient. Jamal Shed, if he gets less fouly, he's going to be a very nasty point of attack defender, I think, for a very long time. Jacoby Walter, I think, has shown a lot of defensive chops. The footwork is fantastic. Like, there is an avenue here for this team to be a pretty good defensive team. And look, they've been pretty solid since January the 1st. They're 14th in defense since January the 1st. And I think there's like that incremental growth year over year. They can be a team that is flirting with top 10 on defense, I think, over the course of a full season as of next year. Brandon Ingram is just sheer length and size is going to make that easier as well. I think they've got it in them. I think they, and they're like tryhards. Like when they're trying hard, like, that's going to be pretty conducive to decent defense. So if I had to pick like a guess as to where they finish on offense and defense next year, I don't know, 13th on offense, 9th on defense. Is that fair? And that's a playoff team. That's a good team. That's like a top 6 team probably in the Eastern Conference. We're still very far out. Predictions can change, but as sitting here right now, just imagining if things all really work out, that feels pretty fair and reasonable. They're also just going to be a team that can throw out a roster that makes sense over 48 minutes for the entire season. They're going to be way more insulated against injury in this case. If they don't draft Malawash in the draft and then you'll find a backup big, that's going to be a priority. That might be a reason to trade RJ Barrett if you can turn them into a really nice big to give you a nice platoon. Like, that could happen. Again, I'm not advocating trading RJ Barrett, but it's going to be on the table. It's going to be a thing that gets talked about because that's the business reality of the NBA we live in. And if you're going to trade RJ Barrett, doing it for a guy who can help balance the team makes a lot of sense. And so there's that. Again, I just think they're going to have more resistance to injury, even if they lose Emmanuel quickly I don't think they're going to lose him for as many games as they have this year, because it's hard to be as unhealthy as Quickly's been this season. Say he misses 20 games next year. You're going to have Jamal Shed in year 2 feeling a little better about him. You're going to have Brandon Ingram and Scotty Barnes able to kind of help you guide the offense in the absence of Quickly, as opposed to it just being Scotty Barnes. Ingram's just going to be this release valve that makes everything easier for everybody. Again, if it all works fit wise and he's able to adapt. They're going to be able to roll out over the course of 48 minutes, 2 or 3 starters at a time, sprinkle in these good bench guys, have fresh legs, deep lineups, not force guys to play 38 minutes a game, probably having a lot of good players. There's a ton of power in it. And I think the Raptors have a chance to have a lot of good players next year. Again, it's going to require that internal development from Walter, Dick, Shed, Bobo, et cetera, et cetera. It's going to require their first round pick, Malawash, or whomever else it ends up being, to be at least a reasonable contributor as a rookie off the bench. And they'll be in a pretty good position and context to do that, I think. And then you look around the Eastern Conference, and it's just like, how scared are you of a lot of these teams? Look at the Pistons, man. The Pistons are 26 and 23. They've made that jump this year. They've been very good. Cade's been awesome. But it's not like a team loaded with super duper cream of the crop high end talent. Maybe you believe that about Asar Thompson, but he's missed a ton of this season. Hasn't really been all that much of a contributor to things. Like, they just have a lot of pretty solid players. Beef Stew, Jalen Duren, all the veterans they brought in. Like, they just have like 7, 8, 9, 10 guys who are viable rotation players. Malik Beasley shooting the cover off the ball. Like, that's very helpful. It's just they have a lot of viable, competent NBA players, and in an Eastern Conference where there are a lot of stinkers, a lot of really bad teams, and teams that next year, I think a lot of those dregs teams are going to stay in the dregs. Like, I don't think the Hawks are kind of stuck in mud to me. They're not very good. The Bulls, I mean, boy, oh boy, they stink out loud. They're proudly stinky. It's kind of nuts. The Hornets are going to stay bad. The Wizards are so many years away. The Nets are going to be awful. What other teams are there? Like, there's a lot of bad teams, and the jump from where the Raptors are now, it might seem insurmountable because they're 17 and 38 team. They're not a 17 and 38 team on true talent. There's just no way that's true. It clearly was like the Quickly injury hurt them. Not having Olynyk and Brown to start the year really hurt them because they were thin. They were rolling out rookies for heavy minutes. That won't be the case next year. They're going to have guys who are a little further along in their curves, taking little baby steps. Development's not linear, but most of the time, you get a little bit better, a little bit more fine-tuned and refined year over year. I think that's worth believing in here. Milwaukee is on the brink of collapse. Who knows what they're going to look like next year? Miami is okay, not amazing, not stocked with crazy high talent. The Magic, I mean, if they ever get their crap together and get a guard, maybe I'll buy them. But until then, I'm not buying the Magic. I'm sorry. And boy, oh boy, am I excited. Do I ever have some Ingram and Scotty better than Franz and Paolo takes in the holster, ready to pull out whenever the moment strikes sometime next year? You bet your ass I have those takes ready to pull out. I think the Eastern Conference is very climbable if you're the Toronto Raptors with this infusion of talent you've given yourself with the Ingram trade, which you didn't give up any really important future talent on the team to acquire. And then, of course, the high pick you're going to have this year. Even if they do nothing else, they're in a way better position for next year than they were this year. And we've seen over the course of January and February, at the very least, this team is all right. They're pretty solid. They have some legs. They have some bones the first couple months of the season. And really, we're talking about December here because they were pretty effective for the first 20 or so games. Despite being 7 and 15, they were unbelievably competitive in a ton of close games. They lost them because they're super young, and young teams and rookies lose games. That's part of the deal. We're really talking about December deflating their record and deflating the overall image of this team. And that was a time where they dealt with some injuries. They were, a lot of injuries going on. They had Pearl out for a stretch in that month. Scotty missed some time that month. You had, of course, like the whole team getting sick for a couple of weeks. Like, these are real explanations. They're not excuses. They're just explanations for the poor play. If you take the 10,000 foot view and just look at the roster as it's built, look at what they've done over the last month and a half, looking extremely competent. This is not going to be some, like, you got to jump. Like, the Pistons jump is remarkable. They won 14 games last year. They've already almost doubled that. Like, the jump they've made is amazing. The Raptors jump does not need to be nearly that dramatic to get to where the Pistons are right now, which is the 6th seed, like comfortably in the 6th seed. It's on the table for this Raptors team. I really believe it. Like, that's the case for next year, is you just use the combination of a lot of depth, an improved set of talent, incremental growth, a not very good Eastern Conference, and boom, you're a playoff team. If I had to set the over-under right now, I would bet, I guess the Vegas over-under will come in at like 42.5 wins for this team next year. I could totally see them hitting 45. Things break really right, 47, something like that. And you build on that from there, right? And a big test for how real whatever win total they put up next year will be the playoffs, which, man, oh man, do I miss the playoffs? And do I miss the things you learn in the playoffs? That is what we're going to get into next. How playoff viable could this theoretical mid 40s Raptors team next year be? We'll get into that to close things out in a sec. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you missed the opening tip or want to bet on the fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. Lots of ways to go do it. If you're a fan of a sports team, I'm always a big fan of the happiness hedge. That's like my favorite form of gambling. Kind of the only way I ever do gamble, frankly, is I go in. And if I'm rooting for a team, I bet against that team to win, so that if my team loses, I at least get some money out of the deal and I'm not feeling so bad. Maybe not like healthy behavior for the middle of the season, but playoff games, certainly. If you want to, dull the loss of, the Raptors, or sorry, the Maple Leafs in the playoffs, as I've done for many years, you can make yourself some money off of the Leafs losing and feel a little bit all right about it. That's a cool thing. Right now, new FanDuel customers and get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your one shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA and the Locked On Podcast Network. Closing it out here on your Toxic Positivity Friday edition of Locked On Raptors. Thanks for being along as we have had you all week. Just a heads up, Monday's a holiday. I will not be doing a podcast Monday. I'm going to take some time, but I'll be back for 4 shows next week. Probably get into some draft stuff. Michael Shearer from Basketball Poetry is going to be on. We're going to talk about the Brandon Ingram fit and how it can all work. Looking forward to that very, very much. All right, let's get to playoff viability. That is the thing that you do this for, right? The thing that you build a team that can make the playoffs for is to playoff stress test it. It's like taking a car to the crash test dummy range and seeing, all right, does this thing hold up after you design it? And if you've built something strong, absolutely, it holds up. And if not, then you go back to the lab and you tinker and you fine tune. That is what the playoffs are for. Playoffs are for giving that full, proper evaluation of what actually do you have here? What matters on this team that you have? Who is playoff viable? Who drops in the playoffs? Who can't stay on the floor when the matchup gauntlet starts to really grind and teams are being really, really intentional about how they're lining up, what they're doing, who they're bringing into actions on defense, who they're running stuff for on offense. Like, this is the test. This is why I'm a big fan of just being good and being in the playoffs. And it's because the Raptors have had a lot of success doing this very much in the recent past. The 2013 to 2019 Raptors were never like no doubt contenders. We talked ourselves into it, sure, in a couple of years. That 2015-16 year, there were a couple nice moments. They made it to the conference finals. No one ever really thought they were going to beat the Cavs, though. I think the one year it felt like, oh, this team could actually do the thing was 2017-18, where they had like the best net rating in the league, or the second best net rating. They were way better in net rating than the not at all good and very stinky Cleveland Cavaliers were that regular season. It felt like they might actually do it. They had home court. The Cavs barely scraped by the Pacers in the first round. It really felt like, oh, okay, the Raptors are going to do it. If they're actual contenders, this is the year for it. And then they didn't do it. And they totally got broken by LeBron that series and proved they were never really all that serious as inner circle contenders. That's fine. What those years provided was all kinds of information that then helped them tinker and build the team going forward. It helped them decide, okay, like Jonas Valanciunas, we're probably going to need a different center when things really get down. Oh, Marc Gasol, there we go. Let's go do that. That was like, that trade was born out of years of learning what Jonas Valanciunas could and could not do in the postseason. The DeMar DeRozan trade was born out of realizing that DeMar DeRozan, for all of his good as a player, really struggles in the playoffs against specific matchups, and you needed to go find a guy who with a little bit more two-way balance, and they got like the most extreme version of it with Kawhi, but that trade doesn't happen if you don't get into the playoffs and figure out what works and what doesn't and tinker over time. They got DeMarre Carroll because they had no shot against the Wizards, and Carroll didn't totally work out, but also he kind of gets forgotten. He was actually pretty solid in that conference finals run back in 2015-16. Deserves a little bit of flowers, even though the injuries kind of, I think soured most of his tenure with the Raptors. But yeah, like this is what they did. They got CJ Miles when they realized they needed more shooting. Like over the course of time, being in the playoffs helps you figure out what you then need to do. What are the next steps in this build? This is not a finished product. This is not the Raptors team they're going to go forward with for many, many years. Like there are going to be new guys swapped in and out and interchanged parts. But the bones of the team, Scotty Barnes, Brandon Ingram, probably Emmanuel Quickly, some of the younger guys, if they really pop, like those guys will be around. And then the playoffs are how you decide how you fill in the gaps around them. And again, they just kind of, I really think there's a lot of power in just being good, being in the conversation, being relevant, collecting a lot of good players. It puts you in a better position to eventually strike when the opportunity for a big trade arises. And it allows you to kind of have a supporting cast in place that you can sell on a potential star you're trading for. There are all kinds of benefits to just being pretty good. And that's why I'm a big fan of what the Raptors have done here with, again, the Ingram trade, which I was kind of out on to begin with, but I've totally talked myself into thinking about it over the last week nonstop. I'm in on the concept of it. And if it all does work, I think we're looking at a pretty fun era of Raptors basketball just in those fledgling stages at the moment. And again, the playoffs could break your heart. They probably will break your heart. That's what the playoffs are for. One team wins them. Everyone else is sad at the end. But the sadness also comes with learned information about what happens next. So you be less sad the next time out. And I think that is what we're looking at here. As far as like, what do we know playoff viability wise about the guys on this Raptors team? We don't know a ton, right? It's been a long time since we've seen the Raptors in the playoffs. It's now going to be 3 seasons since they were in, barring some hilarious thing that'll piss everyone off if the Raptors go on a run down the stretch and get into the postseason. Man, oh man, that would be bad, funny. I don't know. I'm kind of here for it if it happens, just to laugh and enjoy the chaos of it all. Either way, I don't think it's going to happen. I think they're going to be bad, but what do we know? We know Scotty Barnes was a playoff riser the last time we saw it. Like in that Sixers series, he missed a couple games with the ankle injury. He came back lightning quick from the ankle injury. He was awesome in that series. He was probably their second best player after Pascal Siakam, who, never forget, was extremely good for most of that series. You have Brandon Ingram's the other guy with like some actual playoff experience. Not a ton. He's played 2 playoff series before. He was not good last year against the Thunder in the first round. He was also hurt. And Lou Dort really like smelling blood in the water. It was not a pleasant time for Brandon Ingram last year. But his other playoff series back in 21-22 as an underdog, I think they were a 6 seed against the Phoenix Suns with the Pelicans. 27 points, 6 boards, 6 assists, 58% true shooting. Brandon Ingram was a playoff stud for that Pelicans team back in 2021-22. I think you can believe a little bit in his game being playoff conducive. Offensively, totally. He can get stuff when things are down. He can go hunt mismatches and switches. He can just rise up in a phone booth from the 18-foot range and score when you need him to. That's a playoff-ass player to me. Defensively, we'll see. I think the defense is going to hold up fine within the context of being next to Scotty Barnes, though the ender of worlds on defense. We'll see. But, offensively, 100% a playoff-ass player, Brandon Ingram. Beyond that, like, again, that's what we need to find out, right? Can Grady Dick stay on the floor defensively in a playoff series? That's going to be a major question that dictates the future of Grady Dick. And you probably want to get some info on that before you got to pay him after next season. It would be a pretty valuable set of info to get to see Grady Dick play in the playoffs before you commit big money to him. Can Jonathan Mobo be offensively viable enough in a playoff series to get spot rotation minutes? Can RJ Barrett hold up defensively in a playoff series? Can Emmanuel Quickly shed the demons of a pretty bad playoff tenure? I think it was like one really bad series he had with the Knicks, during his time there, but can he shake that? It's like, again, this is what the playoffs are for. It is figuring out who works, who doesn't, who are the pieces who are here for the long haul and who are not. Next year's the time to start figuring it out. And because I think this team is absolutely playoff quality next year, I think we're going to finally get a chance to see that. And I am very excited about that. That is far better to me than them going into next year, preparing to be bad once again, doing the Jazz and Wizards and all these crappy loser-ass teams that sit around hoping the lottery will save them. The Raptors have gone out and kind of gotten a head start on things and made it so even if the lottery doesn't fully save them this summer, they still have the core of a team that, yeah, they're not going to be a championship level team probably, but they have the pieces to get to the postseason and then figure out what's next as they try to become one of those types of teams down the line. Look, if your bar for good basketball is being inner circle contender, next year's Raptors are not going to be for you. that's a very silly bar to have. Enjoy the fun winning basketball that I think we're going to see next year and see where it takes you in the playoffs. That's the fun of this whole thing. And the year-over-year arc, right? Like, the NBA is not told in a single year. Like, the story of the NBA is not told in 1 year arcs, right? It is multiple years. It is failure, then failure, then failure, then success, then maybe more failure than success again, right? If everything breaks right. And maybe it all ends in failure eventually and nothing is brought out of it. But multiple years of watching a team grow and learn, there's a lot to be said for that. There's a lot to be enjoyed with that. And I do think we're in the very early stages of the Raptors putting together a run just like that. Will it end the same way the last fun run did? Probably not, because it's really damn hard to win a championship. But that doesn't mean you can't have a ton of fun along the way. We'll leave it there. Thank you so much for rocking with the show. We'll be back again on Tuesday after the long weekend. And yeah, we'll get into probably some draft stuff, talk about All-Star, I guess. I don't know. Could not be less interested in the All-Star game this weekend. I'm going to be very much taking the weekend off from thinking about basketball. Maybe I'll watch Grady and the Rising Stars. Maybe I'll watch the dunk contest on tape delay. But other than that, yeah, not going to be a ton of All-Star analysis on this here show next week. That's fine. We'll have lots of other stuff to talk about because this team, wildly interesting right now. Either way, follow, subscribe, rate, review, newsletter on the QR code on the screen or link in the description of the podcast. Discord, link in the description of the podcast. We will talk to you again on Tuesday with another episode of Locked On Raptors. Thanks for hanging. Bye-bye. I am just terrible